Coming out of the Civil War, the Presbyterian churches of the United States had a real concern as to what's going to happen to the freed black men. How are they going to get an education? So Maryville College had one of the first black graduates, who was Dr. William Franklin. He was also a graduate of Lane Seminary out of Cincinnati, Ohio. They sent him to Rogersville to preach, teach, and establish a church, a school. And so he came in 1883. And in 1893, that's when Swift was built. But when he first came, he taught out of an open frame building, newspapers on the wall, no underpinning. The conditions weren't good at all, but that was the way it was. So in 1893, the Presbyterian churches actually built Swift Memorial Junior College. And it actually did very well because it was also a boarding school. You could go 4 years high school and then you'd go right into college. So we had students from all over the Northeast, the Southeast. So it just wasn't for local students. The Presbyterians looked around and they found that Rogersville was a stronghold for Presbyterians. So that's why they chose to build a school in Rogersville, Tennessee. William H. Franklin was born in Knoxville, Tennessee. He was also one of the first black graduates of Maryville College. He came to Rogersville because the Presbyterians felt like Rogersville, after looking around, they felt like Rogersville was one of those strongholds for Presbyterians. So that's why Rogersville was chosen, and one of the reasons that William H. Franklin was sent to Rogersville. I think they realized when the Presbyterian churches were looking for schools that they could build, and Rogersville being one of those chosen places, Dr. Franklin being a graduate, they felt like he had the ability and the knowledge to be able to establish this school. He was also a minister, having graduated from seminary. So their thing was, to build a church, establish a church, and also establish a school. And having been a graduate of Maryville College, I think he understood. It was a liberal arts college, so I think he understood the necessity for blacks to be educated, and he knew how to do that. And I just think he was a great candidate, to be sent here to do that. 1883.
So 1883, Franklin shows up in Rogersville.
Right.
What happens then?
No great conditions waiting for him when he came to Rogersville, because there was not a school. He had to move forward and do whatever he could. But he had lots of support from the Board of Missions, who were concerned with educating blacks. So he had lots of help, from them. In fact, Elijah Smith was the president of the Board of Missions, and in fact, Swift Memorial Junior College was named after Elijah Smith. So he did have help, and he did have help from the community, because they realized also that it was necessary to educate the blacks. I mean, how would they be educated if they did not get a start? And this was the start, having the Presbyterian churches establish Swift College. Elijah Smith was president of the Board of Missions for Freed Men. And after all of the work that he had done, helping to get, blacks educated, it was just, it seemed appropriate that he would be named, that Swift College would be named after him. Elijah Swift. The first building, of course, was newspapers on the wall and that type of a building, but then it went from there and established and built in 1893. I think when it first started, of course, they've added a couple of wings since then, since it was built because of the population growing. But actually, Swift also taught elementary. It started out elementary all the way through high school, all the way through college. I didn't realize that. I always thought of Swift being Swift College, and I had no idea until just in reading some of the documents about Swift that it also was an elementary school. Think about it, because it was all part of the education process from the start. So there was grade school students also that went to Swift, and as I said before, you could go 4 years high school and then go right into, at first it was a 4-year college. I don't exactly remember the year that it changed to a junior college, and that came about because of the accreditation of a 4-year college. It did not meet that criteria, so then it was changed to a junior college. And right now, I really don't remember the year that was changed, but the population of blacks in Rogersville has probably remained almost the same. It's like 1.5%, which is not very much. But education is very important to the blacks here in Rogersville. I mean, because, we had students from, like I said, the Northeast and the Southeast, so it just wasn't for the locals. It was just a good central place in Upper East Tennessee that they felt like was the perfect place to build a college. And as I said, Maryville College was such a big part of that.
What is your...
Oh, could not wait to get to school. The only thing I hate that when I started Swift, I was in high school, and so the college had closed. And so I was really disappointed with that. I mean, think about it. Could you imagine being in high school and going, walking on campus with college guys? Yeah. They did recruit people, and like I say, they had elementary school at the college. They recruited. They also had baseball team, basketball, football. They even had a golf team. I thought that was pretty unusual that they would, have this at that time period. I thought that was pretty neat that they would do that. But they would recruit people. The students that came to Swift, mostly, there were a lot of local students, but a lot of the students came from the Northeast. I remember we had students from New York, we had students from Virginia, Kentucky. The students that came to Swift during this time period were, of course, a lot of them were uneducated. They did come from different areas, and the recruitment process was, we've got the school now, the recruiting process, and so we did have students from different states, different cities, and that was a process in itself because there wasn't very many blacks here in Rogersville. That was one of the goals of Dr. Franklin. Is, we've got to get these people, we've got to get, the blacks educated. That was his mission, that was his goal. With help from the the Board of Mission of Freedmen, that was a good source to go to because they were the ones that also helped recruit to bring students to Rogersville. It is a boarding school. Swift is a boarding school. So I think that's what made it even more elite, because they would think, how did you get such an elite college in the little rural town of Rogersville? And I think it came about because of the Presbyterian churches and students coming from all over. I think that was the big thing. And then word of mouth. think it was great. It was that time, and I guess it was going all over the United States with trying to educate, build colleges for the blacks, the freed blacks. Well, you think about it, there you do have the elementary, you have the high school, and you have the college. So I think that it must have been a very challenging time for Dr. Franklin to, have this curriculum set up to cover all of these grade levels. But evidently he done it very well. I mean, I've looked at some of the catalogs, and you could see, how it's all laid out. Tuition back then was like $48 a year. The boarding students could not leave the campus unless they had a chaperone. They had to have devotional service every morning. They attended St. Mark's Presbyterian Church. I understand that the girls had to walk in pairs of twos. They had to wear gloves, they had to wear hats. And it was just a well-organized, great place that was established. Actually, there were teachers from not just Rogersville, because Swift College was really a normal school. They taught, it's what they taught, teachers students to become teachers. I think I remember reading the most, back in those days was like, back in the 1800s, was probably 250 some students. That included the elementary, the high school, and the college. Just looking at the time frame coming on down through the years, we never had like 500 or 600 students or anything like that. It was always on a small level. But it was all about educating the ones that were here. And I think the mission of Swift College was to educate students to become teachers, because that was what was needed really to move forward and be progressive in educating blacks during that time period. I think probably the biggest contribution is having accomplished the goal of educating the blacks that were in this area. It was an asset also to the community. And I actually felt like, because of Swift, the race relation, I think, had a lot to do with Swift being here in Rogersville, just because of education. When it's not like, you're beneath other people, not just because of your race, but people look at other people because of their education. And I think people had a great respect for Swift and what it stood for. So it was not only great for the community economically, it was great for the education and the relationship that existed here. And the spirit was really, really, really great. I mean, I think about the students that no longer, are part of Swift, but they hold it in their hearts, because even now we have a Swift reunion every year somewhere in the United States for a college that closed in 1955. So to me, that's a great, that's a great treasure to know this history and having endured. Well, by the early 50s, by this time the Presbyterian churches had about 22 colleges, and they realized they could no longer fund that many colleges. So they actually appointed an advisory board in Rogersville to try to keep it going. And it did go for about 2 or 3 years, but then it closed in 1955. But when it closed, it remained as a high school, but they did close the college in 1955. The school closed because the Presbyterian churches during this time frame, had about 22 colleges, and they could no longer fund that many colleges. So they wanted to keep it going. That's why they appointed the advisory board to take care of keeping it going, but they just could not do it. And therefore, they had to close it. They closed it, and but it remained as a high school. They sold it to the Hawkins County Board of Education for $100,000, and that's why they had to close. But it kept going, and then it became a high school. And then in 1958, they sent all the students from Price Public Elementary School to Swift High School, and then in 1963, integration came, and in 1964, they actually tore the building down. That was the sad part, because there was no consultation or anything from any of the Hawkins County Board of Education. They just tore it down, and that was a sad day. The campus had a beautiful, beautiful campus. Students we would have, like on May Day, we would have, that was a big celebration. May Day, we'd have activities, wrap the maypole. The students that took home economics, they would, whatever they made during that year, we would have a fashion show, and that would be done on May Day. They also had a baseball field. We had a gymnasium. It was part of the campus. But now the football field, we had to actually use another school, a local school in Rogersville, to play football. But I thought it worked out pretty neat, because I think they would play on Friday and we would use it on Thursday. So I think that was part of a good, relationship between the races to do something like that. I know that one thing, like we never got new books. The other schools always got the new books. We always got books that were handed down to us. So, I mean, there were issues, but as far as race problems within the school at that time being segregated, I don't remember any problems. Well, Price Public School was built in 1868. That was right after the Civil War, too. There were 4 African American men. Right now, I don't remember all of the names, but there were 4 African American men, and they actually purchased this plot of land to build a school. The deed actually said to educate colored children. And so they built like a 2-room log cabin, and as the population grew, they had to tear it down, and so this is the school they built. It was built in 1923, and it was from 1st grade through 8th grade. And as I said, it closed in 1958, and then all the students from Price Public was sent to Swift High School, which became an elementary school also. I think Swift to me was more like a family institution, because I think the teachers really had a concern for educating the students, and not just for academically, but for the morals and values that were taught at Swift. I think that had a big influence on mannerism, and just a good, all-around good school. It was also a school that we had a lot of fun. It was the spirit of Swift was so high. I know now they have pep rallies, and when they get ready to have football games, and people get excited. Well, there was an excitement there all the time, and of course at that time there wasn't a problem with drugs. There wasn't a problem with race. There wasn't, we didn't have any of those things, the drinking, and we didn't have things like that to contend with. So it was a good atmosphere, you know. Well, Price Public, of course, was the beginning of learning, as any school would do with first grade and getting that good basic background. And I think, I think they did a great job of that. I think we had some good teachers at Price Public. We didn't have a cafeteria. We had to bring our lunch. And at one point, I think there was a potbelly stove here, I've been told, and every now and then they would do a pot of pinto beans and cornbread, and the students would be fed that way. There were other schools that were out in the county, and so it wasn't just Price Public. There was I think a school in a little community in Petersburg, and there was one at Sanders Chapel. That's like, I think it was called the Straw Community. So there were a few other schools around, but by far Price Public was one of the larger schools, elementary schools. And I did want to say, students coming to the high school, they had to ride the bus, students, from the whole county, and I know that probably wasn't a good thing. It was accepted because that was the way, that was then, and this is now, but, those students had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and pass several schools to come down here to go to high school. So, but we did get I feel like we did get a great education. The boarding students, they did work at the school. They worked in the laundry room. They worked in the cafeteria. This helped pay for their tuition. And of course, the locals. I don't know that the locals ever worked at Swift, but that was one way they earned their money to help pay for their education. So, and we have several of those items, from the cafeteria and from a lot of the artifacts that came from Swift. That's really why the museum was established, not to lose the history, to preserve those artifacts. Not just for Hawkins County to know, but for the whole state of Tennessee to know what an impact that Swift College had on this small community. Because the students that were taught, they ended up being doctors and lawyers and teachers, and that's a great contribution to the nation. Well, I actually wasn't a student when the college was going on, but from what I have heard, it was a great relationship. I don't think there was anyone that felt like they were above the local students, because I know that a lot of the students actually met their sweethearts here and ended up getting married, and that's a great connection to have, to meet someone at college and then you end up marrying. So I just think it was I'm not trying to paint a beautiful picture as, everything perfect, but I know that the relationship was good, and I think that needs to be said.